Good morning, everyone, and welcome to some stops along the way. This is the 25th episode of this podcast, and as such, I want to do something a little bit different this morning. Rather than talking about a country where I've lived and worked, I want to talk about an issue that I've dealt with my entire career in working around the world. And that's this issue of socialism. You may be surprised that in the United States currently, polls are showing that up to 49% of millennials and Gen Z support socialism. That's unbelievable to me because I've spent almost my entire career putting the pieces back together of economies that adopted socialism. So I'm going to be very frank with you this morning, and I hope that I have a lot of millennial and Gen Z listeners, but also for my friends who feel that somewhat disenfranchised with the whole genre of capitalism. I want you to hear me very clearly. For 100 years, the last 100 years, socialism has been tried. And it's failed every single time. And I know there's a lot of outcry on college campuses now, and among especially the under 40 population of the United States, that socialism is the right approach. Maybe you think that you're being new or unique, or that you've somehow solved the riddle that nobody else has been able to solve. But here's a newsflash: you haven't. All these protests about socialism and Antifa, you think it's new, you think it's different, you think it's unique. It's none of those things. It's nonsensical, actually, if you do the numbers. Emotion is one thing. You may feel disenfranchised by the economic situation in the United States right now. I can understand that. Prices have gone up. Wages haven't gone up proportionally in some cases to inflation. It's harder to get on the housing market now for young people. Many are concerned about what the job market holds for them. I understand all of that. I was young once as well, struggled with many of those same issues, although I will say that it's more pronounced today than it was in my youth. But the fact is, and this is fact, and I'll share with you some facts here in just a moment, that socialism does not work. And another fact is that if you can't define what socialism is, if you can't cite an example of how it's worked, if you can't in some way articulate a reasonable argument behind why you're out in the streets, why you're disenfranchised, why you believe that socialism is a better model for the United States than the capitalism that's built it into the largest and most successful economy in the history of the world, then go home. Don't be out on the streets anymore. Everyone in the United States has the right to peacefully protest. Everyone in the United States has the right to freedom of speech, but there also are repercussions for that. Freedom of speech brings consequences. Everyone in the United States has the right to articulate their views on policy. But the fact is that we need to use facts. We need to understand the position and not listen to a college professor, not listen to one's friends, and for heaven's sakes, not listen to social media, but rather research and understand the facts. Don't believe what you're told, because you're being told something that is incorrect. The facts just don't support it. I had a group of young people not long ago try to make the case that our tax rates in the United States are much higher than those overseas, and therefore it reduces the spendable income of the population. Okay, let's look at that. Finland, the individual tax rate is 53%. France, it's 55%. Germany, it's 45%. Ireland, it's 52%. Italy, it's 43%. Lithuania, it's 42%. Luxembourg, it's 44%. Norway, it's 47%. Poland, it's 45%. Sweden, it's 45%. Switzerland, it's 50%. The UK, get ready for this, it's a whopping 62%. You know what it is in the United States? 27 to 30%. The highest tax rate is 30%. And by the way, most of these other countries don't have deductions, which we do in the United States. So the high tax argument is false. I've had some say, okay, their taxes in socialist countries in Europe are a lot higher, but you get free health care, you get free education, you get all these social services. That's true to a degree, but you also can't afford an apartment. So most people are living with their parents. You also don't have the personal and intellectual freedoms that you do in the United States. You also don't have the spendable income that you do in the United States. Let's look at healthcare just a moment. I've heard some say that the National Health Service in Britain is a model for the world because it is free for all, if you will. It is, as the Brits say, universal access. Well, let's talk about NHS for a little bit. Some of the things that you may not know. Okay? The average healthcare cost per individual in the United Kingdom is £2,700, which is indeed lower than the average in the United States. However, do you know that the NHS has severe funding challenges? Budget constraints and rising healthcare costs have led to underfunding and has affected the quality of care of services across the board. The British government is groaning, even with 62% taxes, is groaning under the weight of providing healthcare. And this is creating poor service. It's creating a system that is literally imploding on itself. And this isn't a new issue. The NHS has been underfunded for decades. They've had elective care backlogs for decades. They've had staff shortages for decades. Another challenge of the NHS is poor performance. they have what they call targets. They have a 4-hour target, for instance, for emergency care, meaning that 95% of emergency patients should be treated within that 4-hour period. But the last time that 4-hour window or target was met was in 2015. And currently, only about 60% of NHS providers can achieve the 4-hour target. Meaning that every hour that passes that you don't get treated, you get sicker. They have another target called the 18-week referral to treatment. It was last achieved in 2016. Currently, only 58% of NHS providers achieve this 18-week target, which means you get sicker. Even more egregious, cancer targets. Currently, 96%, the target is that 96% of NHS patients should wait no more than 31 days from receiving a diagnosis to the first treatment. Now think about this. This is the target. 31 days from diagnosis to first treatment for cancer. And this is the best case scenario. And 85%, the target is at 85%, should wait no more than 62 days to have the first definitive treatment, meaning operation, chemotherapy, or radiotherapy. That's the best case scenario, is that once you're diagnosed with cancer, you wait up to 31 days to receive your first treatment and up to 62 days to receive your operation or your first chemo treatment, etc. Meaning that you get sicker. And in some cases, in the case of cancer, this could be the difference between life and death. The NHS has severe workforce shortages with more than 100,000 vacancies currently. They have soul-crushing bureaucracy and administrative burdens. And they have rationing and regional disparities. The treatment that you receive in one place may be far less than the treatment you receive in another. And in fact, the NHS does not pay for the bulk of social care. This is a myth that the NHS pays for everything. So there's little or no incentive to get frail and elderly patients out of the hospital where they are perceived as safe. 25%, therefore, of NHS hospital beds are filled with medically fit patients that they are unable to discharge. Okay, ladies and gentlemen who want socialized health care, be careful what you ask for, you might get it. Is the healthcare system in the United States the way it should be? Absolutely not. But socialism won't fix that. Reverting to social medicine or a socialistic economy will not fix that. It'll only make it worse. It is almost laughable for those of us that have worked around the world to put economies back together that were broken because of socialism. To hear people talk about socialism like it's some kind of new concept. It's not new at all. It is a myth that won't go away, unfortunately. Let me give you some examples. In Asia, Mao Zedong's Soviet-style socialism plunged China into two of the most catastrophic historical periods ever, the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. In Venezuela, Chavez and Maduro's socialistic schemes turned once the wealthiest nation in South America into utter ruin. Its economy is now marked by hyperinflation, oppression, starvation, and nearly one-fifth of the population has already fled the country since 2014. Socialism has also been tried in Cuba, North Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, Ethiopia, Somalia. The end result has always been the same: tyranny and mass suffering. The German philosopher G.W.F. Hegel famously said, "We learn from history that we do not learn from history." And that is an amazing statement, because it is so true. We just don't learn. We have 49% of millennials and Gen Z that, according to some reports, want to embrace socialism. And yet a huge majority of them have no idea what socialism is all about. They couldn't define it if they were required to. And they refuse to look at examples from history that show us that it doesn't work. And I know what they say: oh, that wasn't real socialism. We're talking about real socialism. Well, number one, they can't define what real socialism is. And number two, they've never had to put countries back together that were broken because of it. You look at the European socialism today, this is a house of cards. These countries are continually increasing their tax rates just to try to maintain the status quo. And for some reason, those in the United States, including Senator Bernie Sanders and others, continue to use the European example as the panacea for all of the ills of the United States. And it's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. And I'm not getting political. Forget about the politics of this. Do your research before you go out on the streets, before you go on social media proclaiming things that are patently not true. Do your research. Prove me wrong. Because I don't believe you can. If you can, I'll totally admit it. But I would ask those who embrace a socialistic mentality to cite one example where socialism has worked. Waiting. Crickets. Can't do it. And before you start citing the same Scandinavian and European examples, think about the data that I just gave you on tax rates and overall income. Do you know that not only are the tax rates much higher in the bulk of Western Europe, in many of these countries that are deemed socialist economies, which they're not actually. They're not socialist economies. They don't adhere to the principles of Marx and Lenin, or they would already have imploded. They are economies that favor social impact and social justice, which is different than socialism, but also they are running on fumes. in terms of their economic growth and their future economic viability. As I said, this has all been tried before. I'm very amused by this notion that there's something new and different. I had someone not long ago, I saw online, they were comparing the Antifa movement to the hippies in the 1960s. Couldn't be further from the truth. Number one, the hippies were, for the most part, peaceful. Number two, they knew what their platform was. They wanted to live a freer lifestyle, and they were against the war in Vietnam. It's almost impossible to get someone who supports socialism in the United States to articulate what socialism even is. If you want to know what socialism is, talk to someone who lived under it. Talk to the hundreds of my friends who suffered under the system for their whole lives, who stood in line for bread, who stood in line for lemons, who stood in line for meat, who didn't have proper electricity. The Lenin-Marx experiment, you know when I really knew that it failed? I didn't need to hear that from a book from a teacher in the United States that had never been there. I went there in 1996 when I arrived in Russia. And remember, the Soviet Union had collapsed in the early 1990s. The Berlin Wall came down in 1989. Soviet Union was dissolved in the early 1990s. This was 4 to 5 years later. And the economy was devastated. We were in rural Russia. They didn't have petrol stations. People would pull their cars up to a petrol truck and run a hose to it. They didn't have modern schools. They didn't have modern universities. Their infrastructure was negligible. This is what Marx and Lenin gave them. This is what socialism is. Remember, communism is a political system. Socialism is the economic system that links to it. This is what they got for all those years of suffering. They got failure. They got poverty. They got repression. You look at Russia now, it's a different place. And that was built on the backs of embracing a capitalistic society, moving away from Marx and Lenin, and rebuilding a society, an economy at least, which is more of a Western-style economy. Even though now Russia has taken steps backward and their economy is beginning to suffer because of it. The failure of the Soviet Union was obvious. The failure of Mao Zedong's China was obvious. And you look at Yugoslavia, Albania, Poland, Vietnam, Bulgaria, Romania, Czechoslovakia, North Korea, Hungary, China, Eastern Europe, Cuba, Tanzania, Laos, South Yemen, Somalia, Congo, Ethiopia, Cambodia, Mozambique, Angola, Nicaragua, Venezuela. Go online right now and look to see how competitive those countries are, to see how many people in those countries are above the poverty line, to see how many of those countries who still embrace socialism are doing. Now the countries like Albania, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, Czech Republic, Hungary, Germany, they have rebuilt their economies according to a different model. And they have done well, even though they've got some limitations as far as their economies recently, because of high tax rates, because of inflation, etc. They went from some of the poorest countries in the world to mid to higher income countries because they rejected the same thing that many young people in the United States are trying to embrace, and that's socialism. Look at Venezuela, which I cited before. A few years ago, it was being hailed by leading intellectuals and left-wing politicians as the model for socialism in the 21st century. One of the leading left-wing intellectual sites stated that Venezuela was going to be the panacea, if you will, for the new economic order. In fact, Professor Cornel West at Princeton said, "I love Hugo Chavez. He's made poverty a major priority. I wish America would make poverty a priority." Barbara Walters, the high-profile journalist, said that Hugo Chavez cares very much about poverty. He's a socialist. What he's trying to do for all of Latin America, they've been trying to do for years, eliminate poverty. But he's not the crazy man that we've heard. He's an intelligent man. And yet we saw what happened to Hugo Chavez and Maduro after him. Venezuela is a train wreck. This panacea for the new economic order, this socialism for the 21st century, is an absolute train wreck. It's time to wake up. It's time to understand that everyone has the right to, in the United States, to espouse a different point of view. On social media, it's made it even easier. All I'm doing is urging you, find the facts. Don't believe what you're told. Don't believe what you read on social media, from either side. Research it yourself. And don't just seek to find sources that agree with your point of view. I believe that in some ways social media has created the death of research, because research now is nothing more than looking at enough secondary or flawed sources until you find someone who agrees with your point of view. Use credible sources. Do your homework. Travel to these countries. Talk to people who have lived under socialism. Don't believe me. I've never lived under socialism. I've put countries back together that have. But you don't have to believe me. Talk to the people who have actually lived under socialism. Not studied it, not had their professor tell them how great it is, but actually lived under it. Who now came to the United States to escape the poverty and the repression of socialistic societies. They're the best experts. They're better than any online source that you can find. So I took this 25th episode just to remind you that the reason history repeats itself is because people don't learn from it. Don't believe the lie. Do your research. dig in, understand the issue. And then if you still believe in socialism, then fantastic. Support it 100%. Join organizations. Do whatever you need to do. But if you don't understand it and you're just parroting what somebody told you or what you read on social media or what your college professor told you to do, then do yourself and everyone else a favor and stay home. Stay home and do your research before you go to the streets. I know this is not what some of you want to hear. This is probably going to create a lot of negative comments in the inbox. And it's quite likely I'll never do another podcast episode like this again. But it would be wrong of me after these last 24 episodes, all of which I outlined countries where I've had people like me have had to go in and rebuild economies. It would be wrong of me not to address this issue of socialism. The United States has built, as I said before, the strongest, fastest growing economy in the world. Is it perfect? No, it's not. Are there things that need to be addressed and equities that need to be created? Absolutely. Do we have a lot of work to do? 100%. But to say that our system has failed, our economic system has failed, is a gross overstatement. To say that socialism is the path forward for the United States when it's never worked anywhere else in the world for the last 100 to 125 years is absolutely a non-credible argument. Do the homework. Don't believe me. Do the homework. Find the data on your own. Talk to people who have lived under socialism. And then I'd love to have a conversation with you. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time on Some Stops Along the Way.